The Oilers take Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final over Florida. Leon Draisaitl is the hero. Hey everyone, welcome into another edition of Off the Post. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Steve Simmons and Patrick Johnston. And guys, it's the Oilers striking first in this year's Stanley Cup Final. You could technically call it Game 8, I guess, between these two teams dating back to last season. But if it's any indication of what we're going to get in this series, Steve, it should be a heck of a Stanley Cup Final. The Panthers blowing that 3-1 lead. I think the stat is out there now that they had won their last 31 games when leading after two periods in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So what went wrong for the Panthers, and maybe what went right for the Oilers in the second half of that game?
I'm not sure anything went right or wrong for anybody. I thought it was a fabulous hockey game. You always hear game one is let's feel each other out. Let's try and figure out what the other guys are doing. Well, of course, they played each other last year, and the teams aren't exactly the same, but they're pretty close to the same. When they dropped the puck to start the game, it was like, oh my God, almost from the minute the game started. And Florida went right at the Oilers and almost scored, I think, in about 20 seconds in. And it was like, oh boy, this is going to be fun. And it was. I mean, if you have no rooting interest, and I basically don't have any in this, although I started the game rooting for the Oilers and found halfway through I was rooting for the Panthers, and then I was rooting for the Oilers again, and then I was rooting for the Panthers, and it was like, if this is the kind of hockey that, we're going to get, then you know what? This is great for the game. Two teams that are so different, that play so stylistically different, and clearly there's no question these are the two best teams in the NHL. There's no one even, I don't think there's even a third. 1 and 2 are by themselves. And that's what we saw last night, and I hope we see more of that. And if it goes to overtime, even better. Although, don't you hate when a game ends because a guy flips the puck over the glass? Like, is that not the worst possible penalty to give up late in a championship game of sorts? I hate the penalty to begin with, and I hate the fact that you're giving the Oilers, you're giving Draisaitl and McDavid, the two best offensive players, in the game playing together. You're giving them the opportunity with the man advantage because the puck inadvertently was shot over the glass. Like there's something wrong with this story somewhere.
It's a free go, Steve. The Oilers need free goes. Yeah. But to Steve's point about the game and the way it flowed, I mean, if there was one thing that kind of, or there were a couple things, but if one thing that stood out to me was a moment early after the Sam Bennett goal early in the second period. And I kind of joked to a friend. I said, "Okay, Panthers in 3," and they're like, "Well, come on," And like the Oilers had played a good first period, and then it was kind of amazing how, even though I was joking, the Panthers just turned it on, but they couldn't get that fourth goal, and that's just how this game works, especially when you've got the two best teams in the game, as Steve said. And just the flow was there, but it didn't line up with the goals. And that's what can make a game great. The thing that actually in the end also stood out to me, obviously the Oilers have an incredible power play, but if you watch that replay, late, obviously in overtime, in the first overtime period, the way the Panthers got stretched out on the PK and the way they weren't quite able to cover back, like you had kind of three guys away from the middle of the ice all of a sudden. And that's when the Oilers struck. And whether that was because the Panthers were tired, they play such a high energy, high press game. It stood out to me in that is what makes the Oilers great, because we saw it last year, obviously in their run. Obviously I saw it firsthand against the Canucks, but this year again, their ability to strike when you're feeling a moment of weakness is what stands out. And obviously the Panthers, their way of just that relentlessness to their game and just try to beat you into submission. I think it's going to be an absolutely fascinating series.
I'm trying to be logical about all of this, and sometimes you can't be, because some things defy logic. And Stuart Skinner outplaying Bobrovsky defies logic.
Yeah.
Stuart Skinner, who they basically tried to replace about 750 times.
Yeah.
Beside guy going to the Hall of Fame first ballot. And Bobrovsky let in a poor one last night. I didn't like a slap shot through his legs. I thought that was very easily saved. But Skinner, I thought, whenever they put pressure on, man, he looked great. I demand to know who in hell is in goal for the Edmonton Oilers right now, because that's not the Stuart Skinner that I've seen the last several seasons. And it's not the guy that Canada didn't want playing for them in the Four Nations or the Olympics next year. Yeah. But if he's doing this, how do you not put him on the Olympic team 6 months from now.
Goaltending is such a story now about how everyone's. I mean, I would say there are no terrible goalies. There's a lot of goalies that are good enough, but that means you're going to get some bad games from them. And that, like you said, Steve, we're seeing some good stuff from Stuart Skinner. The shooters are so good. I don't think shooters really get enough credit here. Shooters are so good. So the goalies are doing their best. The game has shifted from where we were, 15, 20 years ago, where the goalies were so dominant. There's just a lot of really solid goalies, but like I said, none of them are perfect. And even like you said, Bobrovsky giving up stinkers. And it really is in the end about which team is going to be best. I don't think either team's necessarily going to be let down. Maybe one of the goalies can steal it, but I think this is going to be all about what team plays the best.
Well, there's one new thing also in hockey, Patrick. And if you've been watching it as long as we have, you've certainly seen it develop. The east-west pass.
Right.
They really, really want the goalie moving, and they want to go back and forth with that play. And so what happens on the winning goal? Comes across to Draisaitl, and what does he do from his office? Bang, it's in the net. Time was that pass didn't even exist.
Yeah.
It's now part of daily hockey, and it's made it harder for the goalies because, it's tough enough to stop the shot, but you have to be moving and then stop the shot at the same time. And it's just not. When you have shooters the quality of Draisaitl and passers the quality of McDavid, and that side to side, whether it's power play or just regular time, that has made it so much more difficult to be a goalie now.
And it's a technology story, isn't it? I mean, the younger players, the more and more of these guys, all they've ever played with is these one-piece composite sticks. And obviously the stick technology continues to improve. I was talking to Tyler Myers at one point this season, who is old enough to have played with a wooden stick when he was a kid, right? No kid now touches a wooden stick. All they're using is the stick that they're using, the tech they're using, all the way up from a very young age, and they understand it innately. I mean, we see this across all sports now. You think about the way bats have evolved in baseball and some of the young guys and what they're able to do with their bat. It's the same thing in hockey, and it's not just shooting. It's exactly what you described, Steve. The ability to make that cross-ice pass in ways that just we didn't used to see, in the technique, the technology, the coaching. It's such an impressive time to watch hockey.
Video games used to be fun to watch, and now we're watching video games, and it's called the NHL.
Yeah. Yeah, really is impressive with what these players are doing, and that first game was incredible. Patrick, you mentioned Sam Bennett earlier, and maybe if the Oilers don't come back and win that game, he's one of maybe the top stories of today, and he still kind of is. The goaltender interference call that was made, and a lot of questions about whether that was the right call or not, but a couple more goals for Sam Bennett, and he's now leading the Stanley Cup playoffs with 12 on this season. We know he's set to be an unrestricted free agent come July 1st. We'll see if he even gets there at this point, but it's been lots of talk now for a couple of weeks here for a guy whose career high in points is 51 earlier this year, but has been an absolute beast in the playoffs the last couple of years. What is he going to command if he does head to free agency? A lot of teams are going to be in the mix for him, you would imagine. What type of number do you think he's potentially looking at?
Well, it's amazing now when you look and see Brock Nelson gets 7.5. Brock Nelson's 33 years old. Sam Bennett is only 28. I was looking at one of the those contract projection models, and it had Sam Bennett for signing for less than that, and I just don't buy that happening at all. Here's a guy playing in the Stanley Cup Final, playing well with a type of game that teams absolutely love, and for good reason. Okay, he's not the biggest point producer out there, but he's a guy that is in your face all night. He clearly helps your team win. This is a guy that's talking at least what Nelson's going to make, but of course, the longer term you go, the more you're going to get. So here's a guy who's going to get term, he's going to get paid. I half jokingly, it's like, is it time for him to call up Mike Gillis and get the Bobby Holik treatment, see if he can get a huge contract out of this? Bobby Holik obviously was an excellent player, and so is Sam Bennett. I just think the table is set for a guy where there's not a lot of rivalries out there. Obviously, you have the likes of John Tavares and Matt Duchene. Again, two older centers. The fact that he's only 28 plays in his favor. We'll see what happens. Obviously, there is that tax advantage that we like talking about, but I think more than anything, this is a guy that is going to see. I have a hard time imagining him not going to free agency to see what the numbers are out there. I mean, his agent will be telling you teams are thinking this, teams are thinking this, teams are thinking this, even if they're not actually allowed to know that.
Well, his agent is a guy named Darren Ferris, who is also the agent for a guy named Mitch Marner. And Darren Ferris has a way, he likes to take his free agents to free agency.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to stay or move to another team, but he wants to see what the market is for that player. And it's funny, about 2 years ago, the Leafs had played the Florida Panthers in the playoffs, and at the end of the series, a scout asked me a question. If you had one game to win, who would you want on your team? Mitch Marner or Sam Bennett? And we both agreed Sam Bennett, who at the time was making, what, $4 million or thereabouts, and Marner's at 11.
Yeah.
So Marner's going to get in the 13-ish range, wherever he ends up signing, I suspect. And Bennett's not going to get that, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he chooses to leave, that the starting point might be around $10 million. And, sometimes points don't always define players. Players can be defined in many different ways. You go back to Jonathan Toews, who was as good a leader and as good a champion as the NHL has seen, in the last 20 years. He was not a big scorer. He was not a guy who got a lot of points. And in the playoffs, he was like a point a game kind of guy. He's not a lot more than that. And that team absolutely depended on Jonathan Toews being what he was. And I think if Sam Bennett can go to the right spot where they're not looking for him to equal his salary in terms of point level, where they're looking for him to help them win, where they're looking for that kind of thing. I think Toronto was a perfect spot for Sam Bennett because he could slide in nicely as the second line center. But I kept hearing all winter long when I was in Florida, I kept hearing Sam Bennett wants to stay with the Panthers. Panthers want him to stay. It's now a question of what can they afford? How much is he willing to sacrifice on his deal? And if not, he'll go somewhere else, and he will be very nicely paid because his playoffs, and this is his best playoff, but his other playoffs in the past have been awfully good. This is of a different level. We forget sometimes. I think he was a fourth pick overall. Who else was the fourth pick overall? Mitch Marner.
Just to Steve's point, I think the Toews comparison is fantastic. Toews' career high, 81 points when he was 31 years old, right? He had only 2 seasons where he ever scored more than 70 points. The other one was in 2011. So you're exactly right, Steve. Like there's a guy that got paid, and he got paid for doing more than just scoring. It's a fantastic situation for Bennett. And, of course, as you said, he's got that agent who just loves to talk contracts.
Yeah, really a perfect time for him to be heading to free agency in what has been a really strong playoffs yet again for Sam Bennett. We'll see what happens. Game number 2 set for Friday night in Edmonton. The Oilers looking to go up 2-0 in this series. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. For Patrick Johnston and Steve Simmons, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.